Good afternoon and welcome to this Childhood Trauma Learning Collaborative listening session, Connecting with Disengaged Youth, Exploring Educator Vulnerability, with founder and president of We Are Hope, Sean Perry. Sean will give a brief presentation about today's topic, followed by a discussion with the C-TLC's director, Dr. Martha Staley. We will then open the floor for questions from the audience. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the Wabanaki Nation, now known as Wells River, Vermont, where Sean is joining us from today, and the territory of the Wappinger Nation, now known as the Greater New Haven, Connecticut area, where Martha and I are joining from. My name is Dana Asby, and I will be your webinar manager and host. Our funding comes from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. The views and opinions expressed in today's listening session are those of the presenters and moderators, not SAMHSA. Microphones will be muted during the presentation, and at designated times during our question and answer session, you can use the raise your hand feature to request an open mic. When you are speaking, please be sure to eliminate any background noise. You can also submit questions for Sean throughout the presentation using the chat, and we'll try to answer those at the end of the presentation. We are pleased to offer the option of closed captioning for this webinar. You can select this option and change the transcription settings by clicking the CC Live Transcript button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Registration affirms your consent to receive an evaluation follow-up link via email and your consent to recording. If you experience any technical issues, please send a private chat to Ingrid Paget, our technical support manager for today's webinar. The Mental Health Technology Transfer Center uses person-centered, affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in all activities. During this listening session, please ensure that whenever you are contributing to our discussion via the chat or in the question and answer session of our listening session, that you also use language that is strengths-based, healing, and trauma responsive. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'd love to introduce Sean Perry. He has 2 decades of coaching experience in working with youth. He ran 2 residential treatment centers for mental health and observed firsthand that mental health care was supporting the haves rather than the have-nots more than anyone would like to admit. The lack of equality in mental health support services pushed Sean to create We Are Hope, Inc., which hopes to create change in mental health by bringing mental health support at a much younger age and breaking the stigma of mental illness at the school and community level. Sean is the president and co-founder of We Are Hope. He's also a certified life coach, cognitive behavioral coach, nonviolent crisis interventionist specialist and instructor. He's certified in childhood trauma exposure response prevention specialist, signs of suicide prevention trainer, and collaborative problem solving. He's an international trainer in emotional CPR and one of the curriculum writers and trainers for youth emotional CPR, and the first to bring youth emotional CPR to a school setting. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sean, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I have to say that I'm very, very excited to be part of this. And I just want to kind of preface before we get going that for some of you listening today, this is going to be kind of some new age stuff, if that makes sense. It's a different thought process. And I believe that it's a different thought process because we have different kids that we're supporting. The children of today are not the children of yesterday. And that is so very important for us to remember. So we're going to be talking about the vulnerable classroom and the importance of connectedness through vulnerability and what that means. We can go to the slide. Next slide. So before we really dive in there, I don't typically read an entire slide, but I wanted to read this because the Surgeon General recently came out with these statements the other day, or this data the other day, and I thought it was really important so that we as a whole group truly understand what we are up against. And while you educators are struggling in the classroom, being able to understand the reason for the struggle. So recent national surveys of young people have shown alarming increases in prevalence in certain mental health challenges. In 2019, 1 in 3 high school students and half of female students reported persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness, an overall increase of 40% from 2009. So when I hear this kind of data, right, it is extraordinary And while we were prepping for this a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned to the team here, I was doing a training when we talk about 1 in 5, 1 in 3. I had an entire school actually walking through the gymnasium, and I gave them all a number: 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And every third person had to stand up so that the school could really understand what that number means to the population. So if you're talking about 1 in 3 students currently are struggling in a 40% increase, that is a dramatic change since 2009. And we have to understand that going in, especially when we're talking about the disconnectedness of our students to our educators. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, mental health challenges were leading cause of disabilities and poor life outcomes in youth. Up to 1 in 5 children ages 3 to 17 in the US with a reported mental, emotional, and developmental or behavioral disorder. 17 in 2016 of the 7.7 million children with treatable mental health disorders, about half did not receive adequate treatment. And I'm going to venture to say that they say about half, but we all know, right? We're all in the world and we're all doing this work, and we can probably guesstimate that it was probably even less than that. And then we have to also add in the number of students that don't report, right? That's the skewed data. You know, it's interesting. Some of you have probably seen tons and tons of data around female mental health and male mental health. And one of the things that happens is, you know, there's this huge spike in female mental health, and we look at the numbers and it's all the way really high, and the male is kind of so much lower. But we always have to remember that men do not report. They just do not. Culturally, we don't report. And so our organization specifically is really trying to work on that. Unfortunately, in recent years, national surveys of youth have shown major increase in certain mental health symptoms, including depressive symptoms and suicidal ideation from 2009 to 2019. The proportion of high school students reporting persistent feelings of sadness and hopelessness increased by 40%. The share serious considerations attempt to suicide increased by 36%, and the share creating of suicide plan increased by 44%. Between 2011 and 2015, youth psychiatric visits to emergency departments for depression, anxiety, and behavioral challenges increased by 28%. Between 2007 and 2018, suicide rates among youth ages 10 to 24 in the US increased by 57%. Early estimates from the National Center for Health and Statistics suggest there were tragically more than 6,000 deaths by suicide among 10 and 24-year age groups in 2020. Ladies, gentlemen, individuals, we have a significant issue in this country regarding mental health. And the constant question that I hear from educators are, why are my children struggling? Or what is happening within my building, in my classroom? And the answer is right here. This is the answer. This is why your children aren't listening to you. This is one of the reasons that your children are always struggling, sad, hopeless. The mental health crisis has exploded. We went from having a crisis to a mental health pandemic in this country, and we need to call it what it is. It is a pandemic. Next page, please. So what does this mean? How does this, what does this mean for educators? Hit the button. Can you hit the arrow, Dana? There we go. It means your mental health is also suffering, right? That what your youth bring into the classroom, you struggle also because of everything else that's going on. You are feeling overwhelmed, right? By not being able to understand, diagnose, and support these students as they need it. Next. You feel disconnected, right? You feel disconnected, disheartened, and lost. And today I want to try and give you all a little bit of hope and work with you on how, and give you some ideas on how you can get this connectedness back how you can get back this feeling of loss and disheartenment and overwhelmment. And it all starts with you, with being able to support you first. The next slide. Connect. Connection is probably one of the most important things in any classroom setting or in any setting when working with youth, as you all know. Next. From the emotional CPR model, we take connection and we talk about connecting with compassion and concern to open up communication, especially on the heart-to-heart level. One of the things that I think we as people in our society struggle with is true connection. And what I mean by that is we are connected on a surface level, right? We're not often connected in a heart-to-heart level. And in order to do that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, we have to do some very specific things. Next. We have to learn how to truly connect. I will connect through my feelings first, respecting you as equally human, fully listening with my eyes, ears, heart, and respect. Now, just take that statement there, right? Just this sentence. I will connect through feelings first, respecting you as equally human, fully listening with my eyes, ears, heart, and respect. And I pose this question when I do my ECPR trainings to everybody in my group. And I can't see everybody that's here, but I'll pose this question to you and for you to ask yourself, when was the last time you truly connected this way? Right? When was the last time you truly connected that way? I will hold space for my feelings first, breathing into deeper space of resonance, becoming aware of my broader feelings and thoughts. What this means is that you also need to connect with you. See, we are so focused on the classroom and who's doing what and are they doing it the right way, and is my classroom setting our students behaving, in a way that's appropriate, so forth and so on. But we're not connecting with what we're actually feeling about that. And I don't mean the frustration about it. I mean, what's going on with you deep inside when you're trying to connect to that child? Are you on a surface level, or are you truly connecting with your feelings and saying, hey, student so-and-so, this is where I'm at right now. This is what's going on with me right now. And I don't mean talking about your personal life, but what are you feeling in the moment about what's transpiring within the room? So when we're connecting with what we're feeling, we can go into a deeper resonance of connection with that individual. Next. I will share my broader feelings, thoughts, and stay with you. So a lot of you support youth in crisis all the time, right? And being able to share your feelings and your thoughts and stay with that individual in the moment, again, is connection. We have to be able to get past our fear, right, of the classroom, of what we think in that moment. We have to let down our guard in order to truly connect with somebody. So again, I want to just kind of go over this again. I will connect through feelings first, respecting you as equally human, fully listening with my eyes, ears, heart, and respect. This is paramount to being able to pull those kids in with you, so they're not looking at you as power over anymore, but power with. Okay. So I want you to ask yourselves, when I walk into my classroom or into my setting, is it power over these students, or is it power with these students? And if it's power over those students, I can tell you from my opinion and what I see in schools every day that we're there, you've already failed. You've already lost those kiddos, because we have to remember, and I said it a little bit earlier, and I'll say it again, and I may say it again after, these are not the kids of yesterday. They are not. They are the children of today. They have different needs, different expectations, and different mindsets. And keeping in mind, the things that you're teaching in the classroom is only a Google stroke away for them to learn anyway. It's only a Google stroke away for them to learn. So you've got to be able to find another way, and that is through connection. That is through connection. Next slide. But we cannot get through connection unless we are willing to be vulnerable, okay? Everybody say it with me. I can't be connected to anybody unless I'm willing to be vulnerable. So what is vulnerability? Capable of being physically or emotionally wounded and open up to damage or attack by Merriam-Webster, right? Now, we know that we're not up for attack a lot of times within our classroom, but deep inside our spirit and our soul, we're not willing to be vulnerable enough with those in our lives, specifically the students. And the reason why? Power over and not power with. Okay? Power over and not power with, excuse me. Being vulnerable with students requires that we let down our guard to show the shortcomings and struggles that require us to keep growing and learning. Otherwise, we create an ideal persona that gives students the perception that they must be perfect in order to achieve. Okay? Now, listen, we all say that we know that students don't need to be perfect. We preach that in the classroom. It's okay to make a mistake. But the reality is that the leader in the room isn't following their own advice, isn't allowing themselves to be vulnerable in the moment with their students. Vulnerability is absolutely the key to connection. I get asked, how do I connect with my students? I say, get out of your own way and be vulnerable. What does that mean, Mr. Perry? It means get out of your way and be vulnerable. That's what it means. There's no hidden agenda. There's no hidden secret. You got to get out of your own way. You have to be willing to get out of your own way. I'll give you guys a little example. So today I met with a young man who I met for the first time, 3 weeks ago. When I met him the first time, he had his hands in his hair. He wouldn't look at me. It was no, grunts, this, that, the other thing, wouldn't talk to me. He had worked with one of our coaches last year for about 3 months, didn't do any work, didn't want to talk, wouldn't smile, wouldn't laugh, anything. Today, I showed up at the school with a football in hand. I said, hey, man, like, would you like to pass the ball around? And we just spent time talking. I told him about my kids. I told him about my life. I told him about coaching football. I told him about coaching kids in other realms, so forth and so on. And the next thing I know, kids got a smile ear to ear. Now, I could have went in, power over and not power with. I could have went in, thrown the football stone cold, trying to teach this kid how to throw the football correctly, and just went about it the wrong way. But instead, I decided to open up, let him see my humanity. Let him see that I could be vulnerable in this space. And then the next thing I know, this young man was smiling, ready to well, we set a time to meet again. This is a young man that won't talk to anybody. So being vulnerable is going to open you all up to be able to support your children, to support the youth within the classroom, but also create an opportunity for your personal growth, right? And theirs in the same breath. When we are willing to be vulnerable, the imperfect, we help students feel safe enough to also be imperfect and thus take the risks necessary to grow in a classroom. Next slide. So in order to be vulnerable, we have to understand that shame, we have to be able to work through that shame. So follow me here, okay? You cannot connect unless you're willing to be vulnerable. You will not be vulnerable. You will not make a choice to be vulnerable unless you are willing to work through shame. Shame is the focus on self, the inner critic, the I can't go there with this student. I can't talk to this student about this. Now, listen, I'll say it again. Being vulnerable isn't telling your life's business to their students. There are without a doubt boundaries, but there is a space for you to be able to say, hey, like, that really hurts my feelings. Does that make sense? Hey, I had a flat tire today and I am just not in good space. I got to let y'all know that. Today I had a flat tire. It is cold. It was snowing on me. I had to change that sucker in the snow. And man, I'm feeling late. I'm feeling disheveled. Anybody, and then you do so. Anybody else ever feel late and disheveled? Anybody else have a bad morning? Right? That's vulnerability. That is the way in which to be vulnerable with your classroom. I get asked all the time, how can we put this into practice? Right? Connection with your students, again, is through that vulnerability. And you got to be able to have a conversation with your team, with those students. You got to be willing to open up and get rid of, well, this is what a teacher's supposed to be. And I have to follow this curriculum. And I have to do that. If you have to say that to yourself, right, then you're already off base. Because that teaching style doesn't work anymore. And the reason it doesn't work anymore, because those same kids that aren't the kids of yesterday, we don't have the same parents of yesterday at home. Let's not forget that, people. In Vermont and New Hampshire alone, I'm not familiar with the statistics in Connecticut, but I will tell you that here we have a huge population of grandparents raising children, a huge population, so much so that the state of New Hampshire actually called for some like emergency something or other, and they got all these grandparent support groups now. So my point is we can't expect the children of today to be the children of yesterday because they don't have the parents of yesterday. These kids are telling mom and dad no on a regular basis and are running their house. And mom and dad aren't connecting with them. So for the adults in the school building to be the one that's connecting with them, allowing themselves to be vulnerable, that is extremely important. But in order to be vulnerable, hear me again, you've got to work through your shame and your guilt about your own stuff. Ask yourself, why can I not put myself in that position with these students? Why can I not open up and get rid of this persona that I believe that I need to have within this classroom? All of you, I wouldn't say all of you, but I would say that a vast majority of people that are in this room, that are on this call, know of a teacher that did just that. And that was your favorite teacher in school. And that was the teacher that you looked to in school. And that was the one you respected in school. We all had a teacher like that. And that was the one that we loved. And that's the teacher that we have to emulate within the classroom, is the teacher that would remove that shame and get down in that level with you. I had a student once that was hiding under a desk, and a teacher, imagine this, and some of you may have seen this, some of you may have done this, was standing over said student, asking them to come out from under the desk. Okay, asking them to come out from under the desk. You know, everybody's staring at you, whatever they were saying, come out from the desk. I walked into the classroom because I got a call, which I typically don't do crisis stuff in schools. It's not what we do, but I just happened to be around, and it was a student that we worked with. So I walk into the classroom. What do you think the first thing that I did was? I got on the ground with that student, climbed down under the desk with that student, hung out with that student, got on their level. And in about 2 minutes, we got up, we took a walk around the school and got some water. Student went back and had a decent day. Didn't have a great day, had a decent day. Because we're not going to remove the struggles that they have from their life because of our vulnerability and our connectedness. But what we are going to do is make them feel safe, make them believe that they have purpose, and make them believe that it's power with and not power over. Next slide. So how does that impact your classroom, right? When we talk about connectedness with vulnerability, shame, and guilt, how does that connect? Because the reality is that you have got to do for you first. You've got to first connect with you, work through your vulnerabilities, work through your shame, work through your trauma before you can connect with a student in the classroom. Listen, the reality is it's just not a job. Being a teacher, being an educator is just not a job. It's not you go and punch in the clock and leave, at least not anymore. I think you all know what it takes, and that's why you all became amazing educators, because you wanted to give something fantastic back to these young minds. But in order to give back something fantastic to these young minds, you got to be willing to give something back to yourself first. And that is being able to connect with who you are and your well-being, your personal well-being. If you're having a tough day, communicate that with the kids. Be open with the kids. Today is just a tough day for me. How can we get through this together? And when I tell kids today's a tough day for me, I always relate it back to, or I always follow up with the question, have you ever had a day that's tough for you? Right? So now we're in this is a tough moment together. What do you do when you struggle? Right? There is nothing more, I think, honorable and connected than being able to open up with a kiddo like that. The light that goes on, the connection that they feel, that this individual, this adult, who all they see is power over, has come to their level and wants to be part of their life and wants to share. I think that's the most important thing. So I will end with this before we get to the Q&A. When you are connecting with yourself and you are allowing yourself to be vulnerable and you are working through your shame, your guilt, and your trauma, understand this, that, my people, is self-care. That is self-care. You are putting the focus on what your needs are and using that to be able to connect with those young minds in your classrooms. All right, that's what I got. Now we got some questions.
Thank you so much, Sean, for that powerful and really revolutionary perspective on what it means to really be an educator. And it strikes such a chord for me as a parent and an educator, this issue of vulnerability and connection. So I have a few questions for you, and then I'd love to take some questions from our audience. So if you have a question or a comment or an experience to share with us, you can drop your question in the chat. And yes, you will get a copy of the slides and a recording of the presentation within a couple days after we wrap up. But please share in the chat if you have questions. And I'm just going to start with a question about whether you could you tell us a little bit more about what We Are H.O.P.E does to support vulnerability and connection in schools and classrooms?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, we model it. First and foremost, our coaches model it. And secondly, we actually go into, so the way that the model is set up is We Are H.O.P.E hires our coaches. Our coaches actually go in, and then myself or my business partner actually do I do all of the trainings, but we manage the school itself. And so I work with teachers directly, or I work with them as a group, and we do a vulnerability training, an emotional CPR training, anxiety education training, and really help them to identify what struggles they're facing in the classroom and give them ways to actually work through it. So the same way in which we're coaching students to identify triggers, work through this, work through that, we're doing the same thing with the teachers who come to us and need it. We just don't go to a classroom and say, hey, by the way, you should probably do this. We don't do that. That's yeah. So that's the way in which we do it. We offer a lot of training, a lot of support for educators when they want to take advantage of it.
Thank you. And you touched on this very briefly, but I wanted to just go back because this is an issue I know that we're seeing a lot in our work, and I'm betting that you are too, which is that so many educators are overwhelmed, exhausted, traumatized, and connection can just feel overwhelming and difficult. So could you talk a little bit more about how connection and vulnerability can affect teacher fatigue and burnout?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, you have to create space for yourself, right? So we can't connect, I talked about before, we can't connect without vulnerability, shame, guilt, all that, but we can't connect if we're not in a good space to connect, right? So for our educators specifically in this current climate, we have to be able to create space for yourself. Focus on you. What are you doing at home at night? I talked to some teachers the other day. They are first grade teachers. Now follow along here with me, guys. First grade teachers. And I was talking to one of them and she said, yeah, we get, Shannon and I, by the time we're done at night, we get off the phone, it's 8 o'clock at night. And I said, why are you on the phone at 8 o'clock at night talking about your first grade class? When did you eat? Well, I don't eat until about 9. Well, that's a problem, right? You've got to take care of you. Of course, you're going to have burnout and connection fatigue and vulnerability fatigue if you're not taking care of you. The teacher, the educator has to know that although their role and responsibility is those students, they have to be willing to give the best version of themselves to themselves first, and then the student. That is absolutely key. You have to give your best version of you to you so you can give your best version of you to somebody else. That's how you don't get burned out. I do this work all the time. I hear, in the work that I do as a coach, we hear some really horrific, traumatic things and this and that. And I get asked like, how come you don't burn out? I said, because I don't own it. I don't own any of it. I don't take it home with me. I know that it has its place and I most definitely care and want to support my kids, and I do, but I don't take it on. I focus on my mental health and I focus on what I need to do for me to be mentally healthy. And since I've done that, since I started doing this work, since I've done that, I have not been burned out, not once. And that's just the way that I support myself.
You just got a comment in the chat, which echoes my thoughts, which is preach. Like this idea that attending to these issues really is the deepest, most profound version of caring for ourselves. But I know that inner critic that you talk about is a beast.
Yes. Yeah.
This inner critic. So how do you help students and staff not only gain self-awareness about their inner critic, but change the narrative that their critic is using?
Yeah. So one of the things we do specifically for students is, we'll have them kind of write down, basically, what are your negative thought processes, right? What is your inner critic, if you will, saying to you about this, saying to you about that? And we have them challenge those thoughts, right? It's classic cognitive behavioral therapy, right? Like challenge that thought. I'm not good enough. Okay, why are you not good enough? What's the thought about? And kind of digging into that. And so we, for our students, we use thought challenging worksheets, that help them kind of challenge all of those negative thoughts around them. For the adults, we dig into, what is your fear, right? What is your fear in this classroom? Well, if so-and-so does this, then this one does this, and this one does this, and da-da-da-da, right? And it's a domino effect. Okay. And then my question is, and so what, right? How can you use that in certain cases to your advantage, right? Can you ask little so-and-so to now be the leader, because you can see that they have leading skills, right? Can you say to them, hey, it seems as though right now you're struggling. What can I do to support you? There's so many different ways, but it's about the adult getting, or not getting, but working through their fear and recognizing that they are not their thoughts, right? So one of the things we have to understand, and I think this is, and I'm glad you asked this, Martha, this is really important for people to understand. Now I'm gonna go into a little CBT work here. Thoughts create emotion, which impact or influence your behavior, okay? So when a student is doing something and you become frustrated, angry, whatever it is, you have to ask yourself what that thought is, because you're gonna have a very specific behavioral outcome because of it. Go to the principal's office, get out of my class, whatever it is, right? You have to ask yourself, what is that thought? Now you have to ask yourself, how can I change that thought and or that perspective, thereby creating a new emotional response, thereby creating a new behavioral outcome? Does that make sense to everybody? So the emotion that you're feeling in the moment is causing your behavioral response the same way it causes a child's behavioral response, and it's all because of your perception and perspective of the situation, how you're viewing that situation and what that situation is saying to you, thereby causing that fear, causing that anxiety, causing that whatever. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think that that's such an important way of turning that perspective on its head. We're often so focused on how kids are behaving. Absolutely. Without maybe thinking more deeply about what is causing that behavior, what are the thoughts that are causing that behavior. And I'm really struck by your mentioning fear as such a powerful barrier in connection.
Well, a little nugget there is that for everybody listening who has challenging kids in your classroom, I'd really, really, really love to encourage you to stop focusing on the behavior and start focusing on what's behind the behavior. That's what we do. It's not about the behavior itself. It's about what's behind that behavior. And if you can play Sherlock Holmes and get to what's behind that behavior, I'm going to tell you what, you can help that student reduce those behaviors, if not eliminating those behaviors, by supporting what's behind that behavior.
And that also serves a really protective and preventive effect.
Absolutely.
Too, right?
Yeah.
But what do you say to the old school teachers? I don't know if any of them are on this call right now, but who tend to think that being tough on students is what shapes character. That's something that we hear a lot. It's in our work. But
I will say this, that my character and all that I've been through in my life was never built upon someone being tough for me or tough to me. And I don't think it was for anybody. We can tell ourselves that lie all we want, but that's not a reality. Our character is built on those that care for us, that support us, that show us that there is a different way from the way in which we are currently responding. That is how our character is built. But more importantly, our character is partly built on what we're getting and seeing from home. So the strong kind of in-your-face teacher with direct, right? That worked really well because we had parents that followed it up at home, right? And a lot of times now we don't have that. So we have to be cognizant of that and understand that we have to take a different approach. Now, I'm not saying that there should not be lines drawn in the sand and very clear expectations for students. I will never say, I have 5 children of my own and I work with hundreds and hundreds of kids. I would never once suggest that. What I am saying is that that does not, me being in someone's face and me kind of being very stern and very direct, that doesn't build character. That just absolutely does not build character. There's actually no data to even support that builds character. Zero that I'm aware of.
I mean, this follows along with a question that we got in the chat from Sila. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but saying that she's a school-based therapist and sees some teachers holding their students to the standard of perfection, which burns them out and creates anxiety in the children. Any advice for promoting change in this area?
Well, is it Kyla?
Oh, is it Kyla? Sorry.
I don't know.
You can you can unmute yourself, Kyla, if you want, or Kyla, if you want to expand on that question.
I think she's typing.
Oh, you were just unmuted for a moment.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry, I tried to unmute several times and it said the host wouldn't let me. It's Kyla, and yes,
Kyla.
I'm a school-based therapist. And as you were talking, one teacher in particular came to mind. She teaches kindergarten, which I know is a really tough grade, challenging grade to teach. But yeah, I do see her trying to like hold the kids to a standard of perfection. And sometimes I look at the kids as she's yelling at them to stand on the line perfectly. And I've seen kids shake and, you know, sometimes I personally hesitate. I don't want to step out of my lane. But I'm just wondering if you have advice for trying to promote change in a way that, you know, the teachers are still respected and don't feel like they're, you know, what they're doing is wrong or attacked.
Well, I'll say this first. From my opinion, what she is doing is wrong. And if she wants to be a military instructor, she should go work at a military school. That would be my first assumption, or my first thought.
She is ex-military. It's funny you say that.
Look at that. Interesting, right? So here's the thing, right? Kids in kindergarten are going to be kids in kindergarten. Okay. And if we're expecting anything else, then we're probably in the wrong profession. I got to be honest. I speak it how it is, right? It's a child who's in kindergarten. They jump, they play, they dance, they don't listen, they flobble all over the body. They're learning how to walk. More than half of them, if not all of them, don't know how to tie their shoes. And we want them to stand in a straight line perfectly at attention. Absolutely not. Me personally, what I would do is I would go to the principal and say, hey, we got a problem with this person. I don't think they're a good fit for the school. That's what I would do. And that is what I do. As an outsider looking in, I say, I'm sorry, like what this teacher's doing is inappropriate. And it's not adding to the growth of that child. Now, you may feel uncomfortable doing that, and I can completely understand that. But I think from your role and your perspective, what you can do is bring data and science to her, because if she is military or ex-military, it sounds like she probably really likes facts. And facts are that the way in which she's trying to keep these kids so rigid within the classroom is unhealthy. And so maybe helping her to devise some ways where she can implement some SEL work with them to help support their growth rather than them standing at attention. That helpful?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And if anybody else has questions, please let us know, raise your hand or put them in the chat. Oh, Matthew has a question.
Yeah, not necessarily. Hello, everybody. Not necessarily a question, just two things. First, I wanted to start by saying thank you. Thank you, Mr. Perry, for the work you're doing. Thank you to everybody on this call for showing up. Just wanted to express my gratitude for the hard work you're doing to help the kids in your community. It means a lot. And I know a lot of times when we doing this work, you don't hear thank you enough. So thank you very much. Secondly, the thing I wanted to share with the group, I heard talk about the importance of self-care. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. But I think where we get askew sometimes is when we focus on that concept of self-care, we forget about the communal part of it. And the communal care is just as important. They have to work in tandem. And Mr. Perry, you're speaking a lot to that by talking about connection. But when we're in moments where we can't care for ourselves, we need to lean on somebody that's going to pick us back up and share a resource with us.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I just wanted to share that with y'all and just say thank you to everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matthew. I appreciate that. And unfortunately, that's one of the things I didn't get to talk about, but I'll touch on it really quickly. So as you guys saw at the beginning of the slides, we talked about connection, and it has these three little pieces. That's part of an emotional CPR training. And that training is really focused on how do we support ourselves and others through emotional crisis. And so that modality inside of a school setting creates that, so that we know how to support our colleagues when they're struggling, and they can support us when we're struggling. So thank you for bringing that up. Much appreciated.
that reminds me that question, it's something that we come across quite a lot, but how can educational leaders begin to work on this culture or model these sorts of concepts with their staff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I the answer is this, well, it's kind of twofold, is first, they have to want to, right? They have to want to. So I'll give you a for instance. I send out emails to every school at the beginning of every year, to every superintendent in every school in the state of Vermont and in New Hampshire, personally, okay? Every year, I get 0 replies in the first few months. And then I get 1 here, 2 there to kind of trickle in. My point is that the support is there, but a lot of people don't want the support. So those who are in the top tier, right? Those who are the superintendents, the principals who are in charge of these schools, a lot of them need to get out of their own way, get rid of their own fear about what this change means in their school, and be willing to help their educators, right? I know some schools currently right now that are, that are hosting or having like weekly check-ins. They're having check-ins in the staff room, in the break room, but you have to create a culture. You have to be willing, right? Those in charge have to be willing to be vulnerable themselves to say, hey guys, this is needed. And I'd love to do this. And I think that this is such an important value to each and every one of you. We here at We Are Hope, my business partner, James, and I, we coach our own coaches. So whenever they're struggling, they send a text message, they give a call, and we coach them. We are there for them every step of the way to make sure that they constantly have the support that they need. And I think that in 2022 is just a great business strategy for everybody. Just a great business strategy.
Yes, I see a lot of nods and snaps, and Matthew put in the chat, which I think is really important, that it's important to write those things into your policies and procedures and the sort of administrative structures so that you have that support.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Are there any other questions? Let's see. Oh, Matthew raised his hand. Go ahead, Matthew.
Yeah, if it's gonna get all quiet, I'll ask another question. Just curious, Mr. Perry. I took a couple minutes to watch the CNN story about you before we started this thing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, it was dope, man. I mean, it starts with your vulnerability, man. It starts with sharing your story, and I relate to that. It's what got me doing the work that I'm doing. But I'm curious to know, like, what's your plan? I heard you saying that thing, man. You wanted to be all over the country. So what's your plan for expansion, and how do you what's your vision about that?
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that. So interestingly enough, today, right before this call, I got a call from Arkansas, from Pine Bluff. And I was just there 2 days ago. I went there for a day. I went there for 24 hours to fly out to see the school. And we're opening up a We Are Hope down in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, to work with that population of youth down there that are really, if you've never been there, between the gangs and the poverty. And so we're hoping to do some really amazing work there. So my plan for expansion is to continue to get our name out there and go anywhere and everywhere that we are needed. I've been trying to work on getting into Connecticut for probably 2 years, maybe 3 years now. And just nothing has really kind of transpired yet. But I'm patient. So I'm patient. I am super, super patient. And I know that it all happens when it's supposed to. And that, it's going to happen. We'll be in all 50 states. I'm not worried about it.
I'm going to jump in and say that Bree's comment in the chat sort of piggybacks on that and expansion. She says, this is ridiculously good content. Anyone who works in a structured environment with youth could benefit greatly from this. I can't even imagine how impactful this would be if juvenile detention officers and other professionals in the legal system started applying these values to juvenile offenders.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
So is that something that do you work in those populations or those?
We don't currently. I know that the modality of emotional CPR has been given to prison guards and prison administration, but not by my hand, if that makes sense, by other organizations that are part of that, what we do. It is something that it is a space that I'd be willing to go into. But like anything, I will do my research and make sure that we have the right plan of attack. And what I'll tell you is that the right plan of attack is most definitely the adults in the building first, right? The adults in the building have to understand, but I think the culture of corrections officers is that of power over, and for in some cases, good reason, depending on the population. But we have to understand that these youth, I have a kid that I grew up with, and I don't know how old a lot of you are, but some of you might remember Long Lane in Connecticut. Long Lane, it was in Middletown. I was right near Wesleyan University, and it was for youth. And this kid that I grew up with was in and out of Long Lane. I mean, in and out of this place, probably since he was like 8 years old. It was just, I don't know if he ever was ever at a real school. He was always in this prison, this youth prison, and or youth detention center. And just the trauma, right? He's now doing life. He'll never get out. He's now doing life in prison in Connecticut. He's been in and out of prison his whole life, and now he's doing life. I think we have to start with the adults, but they've got to be willing to get rid of their own fears of who these kids are.
So Sean, I wonder, could you tell us some ways, concrete, easy to start ways that teachers or educators or people working with kids could encourage connection in the classroom?
Absolutely. So the way that I personally think is the best way is to change the way that you start every single class. What do I mean by that? The way that you start every single class is with a check-in, right? Circle the class up, get them all close to each other, go around the room, right? Get out a feelings wheel, let them see it on the wall somewhere, with those smiley faces, one of those things, and say, we're going to talk about how we're feeling right here, right now in this moment, and why. And go around. Now, I'm going to tell you, your kid's going to look at you like he got 5 heads at first. They're going to be like, what is this nonsense? But I will say, and I know for a fact, you are going to create so much connection in that classroom. You're going to open up vulnerability for everybody, and you're going to naturally remove the shame and guilt, because you're creating a safe space and a place for kids to be their true, authentic selves. And if every teacher in the building did this before each class, you would see a huge change, because especially when you get into, like, I know that in elementary school, a lot of kids, they just stay in that one class all day with that teacher, depending. But where kids are moving from class to class, we have to remember that we are in an age of technology. Parents are texting kids, telling them things they ain't got no business telling them. Some of these kids got significant others at much younger ages than they should ever have. And all of these things are happening in between classes, right? Kids are answering text, all these things. So from math class to English class, social studies to reading, things are happening. Attitudes are shifting and changing, and emotions are growing or exploding. And if you were able to identify ahead of time what was going on with each and every student in your classroom, you can offer them the support before your classroom blows up. So that's what I would do.
Thank you for that. We're getting to the last couple of minutes. Are there any other last comments or questions? Yes, Matthew.
And be patient with that and consistent with that. Because just like you're saying, Mr. Perry, when you start that, it might not take right at first, but you got to be consistent with it. Kids need that consistency and that structure. But
Absolutely.
if you can stick with it, then it'll start to catch.
And I'll tell you what, and there's going to be a fear in you when you're doing it, because you're going to be like, what are they thinking about me? So you're going to start judging yourself. that inner critic's going to come out. And I know this because I just did a training the other day with a bunch of new kids that I've never met before. In my first class, I was there going, oh, I'm looking at them going, they hate me. They don't like me. My inner critic is coming out talking about all this, telling me all this stuff. By the time my second class, I was good to go. I was able to work through it, but it still happens to me. And I do this stuff every day, so like Matthew said, and I agree 100%, you have to be consistent, but you got to work through your fear in that, because it is going to be uncomfortable for you as well. But the more that you open up about it, these kids they're going to buy in.
We will end with just one last question from Joelle, which she's asking, how do we get you to our district in Massachusetts? We need you.
You go onto our website and you book a school consultation, and then we'll sit down and talk about how we can make that happen for next year, 2022, 2023. Because I'm not taking on anybody else right now. We have so much going on. I can't even breathe.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Sean, for presenting such a thoughtful, important, basic way of reconnecting with ourselves as educators and people, humans, and with the children in our care. So thank you so much.
Absolutely.
For your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for the insight and for taking the time to be here with me today and come and listen to me. And I appreciate it. Thank you all so much for all the work that you're doing as well.
Thank you. And now I'm going to pass it to Dana to close us out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sean, and thanks for all the great questions to our audience. We do want to share a few of our resources that you can take back to your schools as well. The National Mental Health Technology Transfer Center Network worked with the National Center for School Mental Health to develop the National School Mental Health Best Practices Implementation Guidance modules. This is a great tool if you are looking to design or refine your school mental health system. It has lots of great resources from everything from screening to evaluation to different tiered supports. If you are looking for some mental health literacy education for the adults in your school building or youth serving organization, Classroom Wise is a very brief online learning course that teaches you about how to create a trauma-informed environment and address the mental health challenges you see in your school community. And those are both linked here in the slideshow you will receive. We also the Trauma Learning Collaborative have a virtual training library that is organized by topic. It has our most popular trainings from the past 3.5 years, so do check that out. We also have a resource directory that includes all of our trainings, as well as toolkits, research briefs, and newsletter and blog articles on a variety of topics about mental health. We also hope that you can join some of our upcoming events. We have a webinar series and community of practice around collaborations for school mental health systems. Our next one is on February 3rd at 4 p.m. and we'll be talking about funding and logistics for collaborative comprehensive school mental health systems. We also have a healthy knowledge course that you can take for free. It's a 12-hour course that gives you 12 hours of continuing education credits, and it takes you through the journey to becoming a compassionate school community. And we are offering a community of practice to complement that online course. You can come together and ask questions about how to use the course, and we'll also be talking about how to sell social emotional learning and mental health supports to our district and state leaders. Thanks again for joining our webinar, and our funding does come from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which requires us to evaluate our services. Our technical support manager, Ingrid, will put the link to this very brief evaluation survey in the chat. You can also use your phone to scan the QR code that's on the screen right now. When it will also be included in the email that you will get in this slideshow and as a link. Also in that follow-up email, you will have links to request a certificate of attendance, and you'll get this slideshow and a recording. We do appreciate your honest, anonymous feedback, which helps provide information to SAMHSA and assist us in planning future meetings and programs. For more information about certificates, contact the New England MHTTC. We have our email here, newengland@mhttcnetwork.org. Please also stay posted to our website listed on the slide and subscribe to our newsletter to learn more about resources to support mental health. You'll also be invited to join our Basecamp platform where we share resources and information about trainings like these about youth mental health topics. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care of yourselves. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody.